Hi everybody, welcome to my channel. Today we have two tutorials for you and we are going to be making some mixed media cards. We're going to use this lovely Wildflowers purple and we're going to put them on card base. Now originally I was just going to do it in this portrait style like this, but I thought, gee, it might look nice going the landscape mode. So I grabbed out my window templates and, go over the napkin and see what I would capture if I was going to do it in the landscape orientation. And I'm rough cutting that portion off the napkin. And the rest of the napkins are going to be there to make other mixed media pieces or other cards. Now both of these cards are going to be different using different techniques. I make these pocket pouches, just copy paper that I tape the edges off and I can slide the card in, and that keeps the insides of my cards clean because, well, I am not a neat creator by any means. And this just kind of helps keep everything neat and tidy. I'm giving these card bases, which are just cheapy card bases, nothing too fancy, they're not watercolor paper, a coat of gesso, and I'm letting that dry. So here we have the two cards, the portrait orientation and the landscape orientation, and I am going to do both of those. I want to add some texture to this card, and I'm going to do that by putting heavy gesso through this dotted rings stencil. In order to prevent some seepage from going under, I'm going to tape the stencil down. That's just going to make sure that it has good contact with the paper. Now when you're putting heavy gesso through, since it's not as thick as modeling paste, it's more likely to be less than perfect. But because this is going to get mailed away, I don't want it to be as thick as modeling paste. So this is thinner and it gives a more imperfect effect. So once I push that through, I lift it up, and there we have the little bit of textures detailing. And I'm setting that aside to dry, and I'm going to work on the landscape card. So I'm peeling off both excess layers of the napkin. You only use the top layer. And then I'm going to water cut the excess napkin away. And I just use a liner brush with a little bit of water, and you can get as close as you wish to what you're cutting out. And I just go little by little, section by section, all the way around. And then I'm going to be gluing that down across the bottom. There's a little bit of excess on each side, so I'll position it where I think it looks best. And I'm going to avoid keeping any branding. I'm going to make sure that I cut that off. I want to add a little bit of color to this background. I don't want to go too dark. I'm using unbleached titanium and white gesso. Now the bottom part where the napkin's going to be, I'm going to deliberately make that a little bit lighter because I don't want it to darken the colors too terribly much. So I give this, once this dries, I do add a little bit more white gesso to it. Now I want to add some more interest to the background of this one. Right now it's just pretty much just that off-white ivory color. And I'm taking my Inktense blocks and rubbing it on my script stamp that I've sprayed a light misting of water. And now this is perfect for stamping. Some of it is a little bit wet, but that's giving a watercolor look, and I'm not worried about that. So the Inktense blocks, you've seen me use them before if you've watched my channel. They are ink and they are permanent when they are dry, and they're perfect for stamping. I want to add some green to the background, so I grabbed a green acrylic paint and this Ethereal stencil, and I'm just adding a little bit of green to the top portion. Very lightly in there. I'm avoiding putting any underneath where the napkin's going to go because I don't want it to peek through and distort the picture. If you don't have this stencil, you can use any kind of stencil or stamp that's very small scale. So now that I have the background done and I've introduced the purple and the green up top, I'm going to glue my napkin down with my fluid matte medium. Put some underneath and then a layer on top. And I start kind of in the middle and brush out. And remember that the napkin's going to get very fragile when it's wet and it's very easy to rip it. So you gotta be a little careful. You can always fix it, but why go there? And you can see some of that script that was underneath is coming through the napkin, and I really like that look. So now that everything is glued down, I am just going to make sure that it's all perfectly dry before I move on to the next step. Now those green elements were a little too vivid, so I'm getting a little bit of white gesso and thinning it out and just knocking them back so they're not quite as predominant. Remember, my focal image is what I want you to see most. So I'm just giving that a little bit of a brush of white gesso. I have my Inktense blocks in the green, a couple greens and a couple of the purples, and now I'm going to heighten the colors of the napkin. I'm just going to brighten them. So just like I put the gesso on the background to knock it back, I'm adding color to the focal image to bring it forward. And I'm using the Inktense blocks because they are very translucent. You can see through them. You can still see the detailing of what was behind it or what's in the napkin. You can use a wash of acrylic paint, thin the paint down, but some paints are more opaque and you might get rid of that. And I'm mixing a little bit of blue, a little bit of purple. I'm mixing the colors, even changing the colors somewhat. But you can still see that you can still see the details of the napkin through the wash of color that I'm using with the Inktense blocks. If you get a little too much color there, you can just take a baby wipe and dab it up. This gives it a painterly look. And any napkin that is more abstract or watercolor, this is a very easy technique to use. If you're not a subscriber, please hit the subscribe button in the lower right-hand corner and then click on the bell to be notified of upcoming videos. Now I'm taking some white gesso and dabbing on top of the color just to add some highlights and make it look more hydrangea-like, if you will. I'm just adding some detail in and making it very painterly. So it's not readily noticeable that this is a napkin that's been glued on. There's a little bit more to it. So I'm just dabbing on there, just adding the little bit. Here they have little spikes, so I'm kind of imitating the strokes of the brush there. This does get into focus. Just adding a little bit. And I really like how this worked out. You could skip this step if you're not brave enough, but you know what? Give it a try. It doesn't work. You've got how many other parts of the napkin you can keep trying and practice. Flowers are great for overpainting. And making sure that everything's dry. Now I grabbed my short and sweet sentiment pack, and I've got them printed out on various sizes, because once you buy a sentiment pack from me, you can size it any size you want using your printer settings. This one I've printed off on clear sticker paper. So when I stick this on, you're going to still see the background. And that's going to work on this background because the background's very, very light and it's not going to interfere with you reading the word. So on this one, I put the words thankful, grateful, blessed. And I'm just loving the close-up of that script. It's kind of watercolory, not so perfect. It might even be upside down. Just playing with where I want them. That always seems to take me forever to figure out and decide. And then I'm just peeling off the backing. Now a word about these sticker papers. Depending on your printer, sometimes that type, I use a laser printer, even then when it's completely dry and it's sat for months and months, sometimes when you press on it, some of it comes off. So you have to be gentle. I do take a layer of matte medium and put it on top just to make sure that it sticks. But be very gentle, don't rub. Most of the time it works out, but occasionally it does seem to come up. There will be close-ups of this card and the second card at the end of the video. Now, my cards seem to be floating and it needed to be edged. So I'm edging it with not black, because there's really no black or very limited black in here, but I'm using a combination of Prussian blue and dioxazine purple. Again, those are the colors that are in there, and I like how that frames the card. But I wasn't completely satisfied. So I grab my angle brush and I'm going to shade around, and that just kind of bleeds into it, and I just think that made so much of a difference. It really improved it. So before I go on, I'm drying it as I go. Just putting it back in the little pocket pouch there. This just added that little bit of color. It framed the picture and it worked so well. Now the thing about these cards is, because they are standard size, someone can take this and frame it up in a 5x7 frame, the recipient. Now, just because I've done this as a card doesn't mean you can't do the exact same thing and turn it into an art journal page, right? And here I'm splattering with gold just to bling it up a little bit. And then I make sure that that's all perfectly dry. And I'm going to be moving on to that card in the portrait orientation. Look at that. I absolutely love it. Do you see how the framing just works so well on that card? Now this one we're going to do something a little different. We've already added the texture or the thick gesso through it, but I wanted a border of blue around it to really bring out the colors in the napkin. So I am taping off approximately, I'm just guesstimating, a section on the top and the bottom and putting a mixture of Prussian blue and dioxazine purple. I come back with a little bit of purple, but mostly it's blue. It reads very blue. So I'm going to make sure that's dry, and to remove the tape easily, if you use the heat tool and heat it up, you will find it's less likely to rip any of the paper off. So I take those off, and then I am just deciding, do I want to put at the top and the bottom, or am I good? And I decide, nope, I'm going to do the top and the bottom, so I'm using the same tape, and I'm roughly taping off that, and then I'm going to paint the top and bottom border as well. Now remember, this card has been gessoed. Now I want to see what part of this napkin I want to use. So I am going to cut off the bottom part, and I'm going to use this rotary cutter on my cutting mat to get a straight edge. Then I'm going to position this how I want it and mark where I'm going to cut, bottom and top, both sides. And then use the rotary cutter again to cut that off. Now I've left all the plies on at this stage. I think it's easier to cut, but I've cut it with just the one layer too, and it works fine as long as your rotary cutter has a sharp blade. So I'm going to cut off the excess here and the butterflies. I'm going to use those later, as well as the butterflies from the other portion of the napkin that we used on the other card. And I'm going to put those butterflies up on the card. So that is going to get glued inside the frame, the painted frame that we made. So here we go again. A lot of this is repetitive of the first one. We're peeling off the excess napkin, and now we're water cutting the excess section by section. Getting that deckled water cut edge makes it disappear more once you glue it down. And I'm going to put that in right there. So out of that one napkin, I could have made 4 or more cards. And if you're using all the same colors, it's going to save time and cleanup. So I'm gluing it down, fluid matte medium. Being gentle. Now with this one, I did not add any other color. It's just white gesso on there. And here I'm taking gesso on a brush and just dabbing it on that deckled edge to make it disappear. I should have gone a little closer to the flower here. I usually do. Now I want to bring out this texture. So I have from before, or from painting the border, some of that blue purple is on that sponge, and I'm rubbing it ever so lightly over top of the texture from the gesso, the extra thick gesso. And I'm just rubbing it to bring it out, that little bit of subtle patterning and texture. Now, if you get it where you don't want it, you can let it dry, put a coat of gesso, knock it back to white, and try again. I decided that I want some color on this. Or some script, I'm sorry. And I'm just stamping with the acrylic paint, just to add a little bit of script as well. I really like the look on the first one. Now I'm going to glue, position the butterflies, and I took the butterflies from the section that was on the last one as well as this one. And I'm going to have all 4 butterflies dancing across the page. I watercut around them, and I'm just gluing them down. If I hadn't put the texture paste or the gesso through the stencil there, I have stencils of butterflies. I might have stenciled a butterfly on there and painted it as well. But I already had this one, so I've just repositioned it. I put the sentiment, Love Wins, at the bottom. That is also from my Short and Sweet sentiment pack, which is available at Ninny's Napkins. Now this stencil is from the Crafter's Workshop. I will find the name and put it in the description box below. I am stenciling on here these dots with silver paint. And I'm just going on the border all the way around. And I think that just really sets it off, and it ties in with that dotted ring stencil that we did with the gesso, the thick gesso. Then I'm taking Payne's Gray, which is a blue gray, not black, and shading inside the frame. And again, I just like the effect this gives. It just makes it all work together somehow. And I did think, again, black was a little too dark. And I had the blue frame, so I didn't want to go with the blue like I did on the other card. Now I decide I'm going to colorize the flowers much the same way that I did with the other one. I'm using blues and purples, and then I'll come back with a little bit of gesso on there, just giving it a wash. And again, I'm using my Inktense blocks. If you're interested in the Inktense blocks, I do have a series of videos that I made way back when I first started my YouTube channel, so I apologize for the quality of them, but there is a lot of information there on how to use your Inktense blocks in mixed media, and all that information is still very valid. Just intensifying the color of the butterflies to make them stand out a little bit more. This napkin was very, very light, which is why I hesitated at first to use it. But then I realized I can control that. I can change the colors. Making sure that everything's dry. And here are close-ups of the cards. I absolutely love them. Once they're dry, they're going to be put in envelopes and mailed off to the recipients. Thank you so much for joining me. Leave me a comment, ask me a question, subscribe to my channel, follow me on Instagram. Until next time, go get creative.